Welcome back to Mirror's Signal podcast. I'm your host, Josh Holloran, and today we are joined by Nick from Nigel Richards Driving School. In today's episode, Nick talks about his qualifying process and then his progression moving on to becoming an instructor trainer. We talk about some of the struggles that PDIs may face and how 40 hours really is the minimum and a lot of extra work needs to be going into the training. We then move on to some questioning techniques and asking deeper questions and the benefits of that in our driving lessons. If you're enjoying the episodes, please make sure that you hit the subscribe button, and you can find the audio version available on YouTube Music. We're also now moving all of the episodes over to Spotify. So if you're currently watching on YouTube, you'll be able to find some of the older episodes on Spotify. And if you're watching this later than when it was published, then you will also find all the most recent episodes on there. So make sure that you leave any thoughts that you've got down in the comments. Give the episode a like, and you can also share any of the episodes if you think that they will help anyone who is either already a driving instructor or is coming into the industry. So just make sure you give us a subscribe, leave a comment, give it a like, and we will get on with the episode. I hope you all enjoy. Nick, how are you?
Yes, I'm all good. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Thanks for joining me. I'm
No,
looking forward to our chat.
yeah, no, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
That's all right. So we was talking a bit before we started recording, and something that I think might help a few people, at least over the next couple of years with standards check starting to come back, was your qualifying process. So you managed to qualify on the PSTs, and then what, 9 months later, were you saying, go into a standards check?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
How did you find that change?
Um, a bit weird to start off with actually, because it was right on the crossover, and I know they know more about it now, but I still think because it was such early days when it first came in, I think even probably the examiners were still finding their feet with it a little bit and a bit unsure to what sort of degree they really wanted from the instructors. Not that I'm complaining, but it was I preferred the standards check, if I'm honest, how it is now when I did do it based on the PSTs as they were. I did find it a little bit more realistic, and I did find it quite comfortable actually. When the examiner jumped in the back of the car, you kind of almost switched off that they were there, and you kind of just you were in your own rhythm to kind of deliver it really. I think I was saying to you before that I did find it, or I find it now, a little bit sort of harder to kind of sort of fathom that the amount of training that we have to have now to pass a part three on a standards check with a 40 hours hasn't changed with regards to the PSTs, because on the PSTs, I thought, thinking back now, I think it was easier because we didn't have to think about a lesson plan as such, because the examiner would say, right, today and now I want you to teach me on this. So there was no worry that you were going to get a lesson plan wrong. You couldn't really go the wrong way because the examiner would give you the directions and you would read it back to them. So as long as you were delivering the right level of instruction and you were kind of spotting the faults and you did a good brief for the phase one, if you like, then you couldn't, in my opinion, go too far wrong really. Whereas now there's a lot more scope to go wrong, because if you get that wrong lesson for the wrong pupil, or it's not challenging enough, or equally too challenging, or you don't know the area that you're delivering in, it's going to be very easy to become unstuck. But luckily, I'm from Wrexham and I had my standards checked within Wrexham, so I was quite comfortable that I knew the area anyway, so that wasn't going to be an issue. And I found the transition okay, to be honest. And like I say, that was only within 9 months worth of difference. So I think I definitely prefer it as it is now, but I do think looking back, it is harder. So for new PDIs trying to pass that part three, I think there is a higher standard now, and I do think it's a lot more difficult than the PSTs, in my opinion.
So what's your journey been like as an ADI? This was all you were saying a while ago, before we started recording. It was about 2017 that you qualified. So how have you found your time as an ADI so far?
Yeah, fine. I started in 2017. Well, I qualified in 2017. It took me about 12 months to do it, just because I was going through learning to do the job whilst in another job. And yeah, I did the job for about 5 years. Obviously, COVID played a little bit of a part in no lessons being delivered, but best part of 5 years. And like any job or anything I've tried to do in life, I looked for a bit of sort of natural progression, and then sort of natural progression really was to try and help people become ADIs. And I've quite enjoyed that over the last 18 months really to as well taking learners and now help people through their part three process more than anything.
What are some of the challenges that you've found in those last 18 months?
I guess I wouldn't say sort of any challenges for me. I think the biggest challenge kind of comes from the candidates to kind of know a lot of their subjects. I've always found that on completion of 40 hours of training with the PDIs that wanted more time than I've had. You know, it's nice to, when you think about a learner going for a driving test, if you feel like you've really done your due diligence with them and you go into that test center and you're really confident. Yes, they're all capable of making mistakes, but it's almost like you're submitting a piece of homework, isn't it? If you know you've put all that work into them and you've kind of done everything you can to get them up to that standard, and from what you're seeing, everything's looking and sounding great. If they make a mistake, they make a mistake. But I kind of, with the 40 hours, I don't quite get that satisfaction sometimes. It kind of finishes and I'm kind of like, okay, now you're going to kind of maybe go on trainee license, but I would have liked it to be at a higher standard. And it's just a matter of we've just run out of time. That's all it's come down to, really. So we always say that 40 hours just merely kind of scratches the surface. And if they can do a lot more in their own time, then that definitely helps. And that's probably been the biggest challenge for me, because I always want them to be better at the end of that 40 hours. And I kind of think it's only kind of time that will help that, really.
It's a very short amount of time to learn a new career. That's the crazy thing for me. I think there's this 40 hours, and I had Nigel on a few weeks ago now, and he was speaking about, yeah, there's the 40 hours kind of with a trainer, but the
Mm.
additional work that comes into it. And I've had quite a lot of trainers on, and they talk about either their training or what's expected of a PDI or a trainee. And it's generally like over 100 hours is needed to be in with a half decent chance of getting through the process. It's crazy that it is just 40 hours, but I mean that's the minimum, isn't it? That's the minimum by law that you can have on a PDI license.
Yeah, and I think that additional, we were saying that, up to 120 hours, I think it's warranted, and even more so warranted now based on how the standards check is now. You know, that 40 hours hadn't changed from the old PSTs, even though the standards check has now changed. So I think it's a lot harder now, but the required minimum training hours hasn't changed. So I'm like, I think there's got to be an increase. I know people probably won't like the thought of that in the amount of time that they need to do the training, because I do think I prefer it as it is now, the standards check. But yeah, that time just having not changed from not having to worry about a lesson plan and directions and just fault find and deliver lessons at the right kind of level of instruction, to now having to really know your pupil and know the area and really deliver the lesson plan and identify goals, and get them to reflect on their own performances and everything like that. So much more difficult, and it takes practice. It doesn't just come overnight unless you're an absolutely fantastic instructor just off the bat. But yeah, that's it always just comes back to that time for me, really. That 40 hours, wow. unbelievable.
It does seem to be a common message on a lot of the episodes. And I hope that the people watching, and we are going to go into it at some point through the episode, just realize that when you sign up for a deal, whatever that deal is with whatever school, and they're offering 40 hours, I think people just need to be aware that that's like the minimum time that you're going to have with a trainer developing you. But there is so much additional work that you have to go and do in your own time
Yeah.
and practice it, like you said, because it's time and experience that makes things make more sense.
Yeah, and I think when you look at it on paper, you think 40 hours, you think, oh, that's a long amount of time, you know. But when they soon start doing the training, they realize how quickly that time goes. And it's not really until they start doing the training that they realize where their weaknesses are. And I think it comes as a bit of a shock into how in depth we have to go now, and how we're almost becoming counselors in the car with our listening abilities and our level of deeper questioning that we need to try and work with to get the most out of them, and you know, and get the realization from the pupils. And we're trying to dip into their thoughts and feelings, and everything's client centered. And again, when you've never done anything like that before, and you've maybe just been sat there driving a truck for 20 years, you know, and you know, just to have that level of conversation and deeper discussion now, that doesn't happen in 40 hours.
No, it definitely doesn't. I'm still, now I've mentioned it a few times on the episode, I'm still reflecting on a lot of my lessons and how I can develop and how I can help the pupils even more. And I hope that that learning just continues. But when you're at the very early stages and you're still learning what to look for in a student, never mind the questioning and the conversation and the listening and what should they be doing now. And something again that's been mentioned is the timing of when we do things. It's it's a lot to juggle. And are there any kind of common struggles that you see with PDIs at the very early stage? Some things that a lot of people tend to find difficult.
I would say from the earlier stages, things that I've noticed personally has just been lack of knowledge on subjects. So they will know what they're coming into for a next lesson, because we would have talked about it previously. And if they haven't done their homework, or we give them some materials to help them deliver briefs and stuff like that. But it's the very basic amount of knowledge within those briefs that they need. And sometimes they think they can just do that and that's it. And then when you start maybe kind of throwing some questions back at them, you know, the lack of knowledge that isn't there, that can be a bit of an issue. So if PDIs come to the sessions already better clued up on the subjects and really be a master of the topics that they're trying to deliver, that's always going to help. So lack of knowledge is definitely one. Talking people through things and really breaking things down in as basic a sense as they can be a task. And even just to shorten phrases, you know, when they're doing full talk throughs, they could be doing things like moving off and stopping or something like that, you know, and then, but what they're trying to tell them to do is too lengthy in the word. So instead of saying clutch down, you know, they're saying press the clutch down with your left foot or something like that. You know, we need to kind of really shorten these phrases down to 2 to 5 words to be able to get them in, or they might start delivering things too late, and then thoughts have already happened at the point by the time the actual spiels come out of their mouth. And because they're not confident in saying it, they're very quiet in saying it as well. And it's, I would say in the early stages, them are the kind of things that I tend to notice, like lack of information and knowledge, and just and it only comes with practice, but the ability to be able to talk somebody through things and really shorten phrases is quite a challenging one to start off with until they've had a bit of practice doing it, which they don't need to be in the car with you to be able to do. And what we try and get ours to do is sometimes send us some WhatsApp audio messages, or, you know, record themselves doing it, or deliver it to a family friend or partner or something like that. You know, they don't need to be with you to practice that. You know, we've got that time together in the car, but that doesn't stop there. and it will improve the more that you do it, but you need to put the effort in to do it. Otherwise, you can kind of tell the ones that have and the ones that haven't.
That was where I struggled on my part three the first time round, was the talk through and the information that I was giving the pupil. And I was basically saying things at the point that they needed to be doing it.
Mm.
And it all fell apart. It all went wrong on the part three. And when the examiner gave me my feedback, it made sense. I was like, okay, yeah, I get this. This all makes sense. I've really got to go away and work on that. But it was the talk through, telling them that they needed to be checking the middle and left mirror at the point that they needed to be checking it. So they had no time to process what it was that I was asking them to do. And by the time they was doing it, I was telling them to be coming off the gas and on the brake and clutch to the floor. And looking back now, I don't know how we made it back to the test center. In all honesty, it was chaos. And I think I'd not had enough practice because I wasn't on a PDI license. And I had to really look at my driving and
Mm.
understand what I was doing and when I was doing it, and then be looking further down the road for the sake of the pupil, because it's like, right, they're going to be coming up to this situation in a minute. They're going to have to start the process soon. Now's the time I need to start talking to them.
Yeah.
It's really difficult still now to get it right isn't easy. But as a PDI, how do you practice things like that without yet being on a PDI license?
Well, I guess you can always talk yourself through something as you're driving, and you can do this without anybody in the car. And one of the exercises that we try and do quite early on to try and help with that, I guess, is we want them to say words before actions. So it could be, for example, that they are coming up to an end of a road, and then they would then just drive themselves to the end of the road because they're the only ones in the car, again, practicing their own time. And they might tell themselves to check their interior mirror and left mirror. So say the words, but don't do the actions. Say the words first, then do the actions. Signal right, then signal right. Yeah. If they're positioning, position towards that center line, or just steer right towards that center line, then steer right. Okay, now start coming off the gas, squeeze the brake, then squeeze the brake. So we're getting them to do the words before actions. And then sometimes, obviously, they'll be a bit quicker than doing them, or they'll be a bit quicker doing it themselves, but they'll hopefully start to kind of see that there's going to be a delay between what you tell them to do, then that information relaying in their heads, then them actually doing it and probably getting it wrong and still having enough time to rectify it before you even get there, isn't it, really? That's kind of what you said, isn't it? If you do it at the time, it best go right first time because you got no time for that to go wrong at that point. And that can go the other way then as well. When you said about the earlier faults that PDIs tend to make, that kind of then progresses to, we start doing some Q&A work and some prompted practice, and then they might pose you a question when you've also got no time for a question, and they need to come back in with direct, full instruction at that point. And it's learning to have those cutoffs, because as we always say, if we can, to try and help keep the risk element low, if we can prevent a fault from happening in the first place, then it's better than it ever happening, isn't it, really? So, but on the same hand, that's a fine line, because if you come in too soon, then you don't give the pupil the opportunity to have a go at it. But ultimately, if you leave it too late, that risk now is going through the roof, and we need to step in. And it's not a case of now asking a question if we're flying into a roundabout in third gear or something like that. We need to come in and tell them to get off the gas and start braking, and brake harder if they're coming in a little bit too quick. And we need to get that under control quite quickly. So sometimes they'll be stuck in the mindset of, I need to ask questions here, when there's actually no time for questions. And you've got to flip it now to direct instruction, because we need to be a lot more proactive to prevent us coming into this roundabout in third gear and having to slam the brakes on because we're about to pull out in front of somebody or something like that. And that can be a hard thing as well, is just knowing when that cut-off point is. And I think in the early days, my advice to them is just use yourself as kind of like your best guide. So if you would have started to check your mirrors and you would have been signaling by now, If that isn't happening, then you need to start to do that. Now, if you have got enough time, then a question might do it. You might be able to prompt them, should we be checking anything at this point? Oh, yeah. And that might set them off. And just the prompt to do the mirrors, they might be flying through the routine. Then the mirrors are done, the signal straight on. And that might be all it takes. But if that's coming in a little bit later, no time for questions, and we've got to get straight back to full instruction, even though you may have pre-agreed that they were going to have a go at that on their own. That risk element, again, is going through the roof now. Something isn't happening and we need to step in to try and prevent it. Do
you think there can sometimes be too much emphasis or lack of understanding on the use of questions? Because that seems to come up a lot on social media. I've got my part 3, I'm doing this. What questions should I be asking? And what you've said there, it's finding that balance between them bringing it out themselves and us managing risk, and that fine line between which one do I do? How do you find that can be developed for PDIs?
It's like you said then, it is a fine line, isn't it? Because we, particularly if we've agreed that they're going to have a try at something and they really want to do it and they're going to have a go at doing something independently, it just comes down to just that time, doesn't it? It's, they might know the cutoffs. If they're going for the mirrors and they start to signal, they might know they should be doing it 6 to 8 car lengths away from the junction or something like that. But if now you're down to 5 car lengths away and that isn't happening, you've got to step in, haven't you? Because we can't afford to leave it any longer, because that will just start to spiral. And it's just making people aware of that cutoff. And I just go back to what I said a minute ago of, I kind of just say to them, look, if you would have been doing it at this point and that hasn't happened, then you need to kind of come in. But it really kind of depends on the situation as well. If you have got the time, then by all means, just throw a question there, because if there's nobody behind you and you're not holding anything up and you're not tearing into an end of a road super quick, and you do need to just get them to check an interior mirror, right mirror, whatever it might be. Sometimes just asking them what should they be checking, or what should we be doing about the speed at this point, or something like that. It's kind of prompting them along to either just get off the gas, but you've got to give yourself a second or two then, right? What are we going to do about the speed at this point? And if nothing's happening, right, come off the gas. And it's just that very quick switch then, isn't it? Right, come off the gas, start braking, brake harder, and it's starting to get that terminology in as well, isn't it, as well, which can be quite difficult with them. Not just ease your right foot up or lift off the gas, or, you've got to be quite precise with the words to get the quickest action out of them, haven't you, really? So it is a difficult one. And again, something else that only comes with practice. You kind of don't know sometimes until you've done it later and you go, I should have come in a bit earlier there. I'll know for next time. And that's kind of what we try and do within the 40 hours as much as we can when we're role playing mistakes, if you like. But then just that practice, and just comes down to time. Again, 40 hours makes me laugh. Yeah.
It's making me think a little more now about the benefits of a PDI license and getting that experience under the guidance of a trainer, because there is so much information that we need to know as driving instructors and so much learning. And I done 40 hours intense, so I done a week's intense course, decided not to go on a PDI license, and off I went on my own with a dual control car teaching for free.
Wow.
And I was lucky. I was employed. I could afford to do it. And I was teaching a couple of nights a week and I was doing it for free. So it kind of worked for me. But I probably would have been in a better position if I had more experience for that first part 3. And I think learning and understanding that the PDI license is for learning is massively important as well, because I think people fall into the trap of, wait a minute, I'm earning an all right wage here. I'm delivering some good driving lessons because everyone's leaving me good reviews. So I'm going to keep going, and maybe their training's not in the forefront of their mind when they're on a lesson. Therefore, they're not making best use of their 3 to 6 months on a PDI license, really focusing on those skills that you've mentioned about the balance between questioning and managing risk and prompting and digging deeper with the questions and everything else that comes with being a driving instructor.
Yeah, and it's good. Like we usually, as soon as they've completed their 40 hours and our PDIs are going on to their trainee license, we like to try and sit in their first session really within the first 2 to 3 weeks of being on that. And the way that we generally run it is we would observe a lesson, make our own notes for an hour. We would have an hour's debrief after that. And then we would book in a separate sort of 2 hour session one-to-one with the PDI to work on the faults that they brought out from that session and their various levels. We've got novice pupil, part trained, and then as close to trained or full license holder as we can get. And over those first three, we get a bit of a snapshot to how their instruction is at the various levels, and we help them out with that. And it's quite surprising. And when you think about like the 40 hours, if they're going back to they finished their 40 hours and they might have done some moving off and stopping topics quite early on in that 40 hours, the likelihood is that they probably will have forgotten stuff. So unless they've been able to practice with people in their own time, to then get like a completely raw pupil and kind of remember what they did 40 hours ago, which has taken them X amount of months to do, it's good to kind of have somebody there to just go, okay, you missed this. And sometimes it's just a bit of a reminder or as a bit of a refresher. And it's surprising the stuff that you can pull out really, and you can feel bad about it, or I do sometimes, because you might like have a full A4 sheet of paper of all stuff that they could have improved on or done differently, and it's not to slate them to say, oh, this was rubbish and this was rubbish, but it's just helpful sort of reminders. Okay, at this point we could have done this. At this point you could have done this. You turn this way, whereas actually I would have adapted the lesson and focused a bit more on that because that wasn't fixed just yet. You didn't really identify that fault, or you didn't really dig deep enough. You talked about it, but you didn't really offer any correction with it. Or you might have talked about the correction, but then not actually corrected it. And it's, you learn a lot from other people, really, just sitting and observing lessons, and you kind of take it in. And I think they benefit from it. I think it would be hard not to benefit from that extra training and having somebody else kind of sort of scrutinize your lessons a little bit, really. But equally, I think even with people, if they don't do the trainee license and they do the 40 hours and they're good and they pass the part 3 first time, that's not to say that they're delivering outstanding lessons. You know, I've done the same. I've sat in on the back of people who have done the 40 hours, they passed the part 3 first go, and then a couple of months later, you're observing a lesson and you're like, again, this didn't really feel brilliant. I think if you would have done that on your part 3, I can't see that would have passed, to be honest. And it's so it's not, again, it just goes back, I think, to it doesn't make you an amazing instructor after 40 hours, even if you pass. It's probably still a lot, and it'll take a couple of years to kind of get really confident at what you're doing and actually making sure that you're doing the right thing, really.
That was a huge lesson for me sitting in the back of lessons. I done my 40 hours and then I didn't have any official training after that between my first part 3 and my second, but I was working quite closely with someone locally, a PDI, and we were sitting in each other's lessons and watching each other and then going critiquing each other in a coffee shop somewhere.
Yeah.
And we both came from development backgrounds, just not in this industry. So we had all the information from our training and we had an understanding of what it was we was trying to do. And the benefit that we both got from sitting in the back and watching a lesson, and I've mentioned this so many times, and I think more people should be doing it as PDIs, ADIs, is sitting in watching lessons and have people watching your lessons, because the amount that you see, and like you said, you can pick things up. Maybe I'd have changed that. Maybe I'd have done this. And I know myself, if I'd have been in the passenger seat delivering that lesson, maybe I'd have missed something that someone in the back would have picked up. And I think that puts you in a really good place going to the part 3 hour standards check, because you've got an idea of what the examiner's able to see and how much easier it can be sat in the back and just observing, not having to really worry about risk management or anything else, and really watch the instructor and the pupil. And I think that's such a huge benefit. And a lot of PDIs I talk to don't get observed and haven't seen a driving lesson being delivered. And it's crazy.
Yeah, yeah, and you're dead right. And I think it works both ways. For if you're the one that's delivering the lesson, I think it's good to have the feeling that somebody else is in the back, even though they, it might be just another ADI. So you're not getting assessed, but they're just listening in. So it gets you used to the feel of somebody else being in there. So even that environment doesn't feel as alien to when you take the part 3 or the standards check again. And yeah, like you said, can't reiterate it enough. You see and hear so much more because you're just listening, aren't you? You're not having to worry about what they're coming into and actually telling the pupil what they should or shouldn't be doing. You're just listening to what's coming out of that instructor's mouth, and it's amazing the amount of things that you can hear that's there, and you pick up all the good bits and you pick up the not so good bits, and like you said, I maybe wouldn't have done that, I would have done this, and yeah, bouncing it off each other, learn from each other as much as you can. Absolutely.
It helped me a lot. And it's a piece of advice that I give to people that do reach out and they're like, I'm struggling. What can I do? And one of the first things is go and get training from a reputable trainer. And the other one is watch some driving lessons. Just find a driving instructor, anyone that's willing to have you in the back. And as long as you're coming into it with an open mind as to this might be a good lesson, it might not be, because we don't know who this ADI might be and what level they're at. But just being able to watch it and play things through in your head as to maybe what you would have changed or how you could have developed a certain situation is invaluable, in my opinion. Being able to see other people doing it and have other people watching you do it live is so important to prepare for the final exam.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely bang on. I think, yeah, get as much practice as you can. Get somebody sitting in the back and take it with a pinch of salt. Don't take it to heart. It's nothing personal. It's only there to kind of benefit you both, really, isn't it?
It is. And if we do everything correct, then where's the room for development? And there's always something that I think we can be doing better or can be tweaked slightly. And that's just because of the variety of situations we're faced with on the road and the variety of pupils that we get. When you talk about terminology, I'm trying to think of what terminology I use. And I find I change it depending on the individual, depending on the student. It's for some, I have the go button and the stop button,
Yeah.
and that works for them. And other people, when I forget who I'm talking to, look at me like I'm an idiot. They're like, "What are you on about, Josh? It's an accelerator." I'm like, "So sorry." So it's such a challenge, isn't it? There's so much with the job. But what I would like to ask you about, because you've mentioned it a couple of times, and that's asking deeper questions.
Mm.
And it comes up a lot, like I've already mentioned. How can we get past that first question and that almost immediate answer that a student gives us and get to the deeper reasoning behind what it is?
Well, we kind of basically, we've got to identify whatever the fault might be, if we are discussing sort of fault-based sort of questions, but we need to identify what's caused it, how we're going to correct it, and basically what's the consequences, and we've got to kind of, like you said, get past that first question, really. So we might be able to pull up for a start. Obviously we can do a lot on the move, but some things will require a bit more attention, and some people aren't good at sort of listening. They might be you're yapping away in their ear whilst they're driving and nothing's going in. Do you know what I mean? So we need them to kind of pull over and have a good chat, really. And ultimately, we're trying to discuss them what's happened, trying to figure out why did it happen, and I think the deeper kind of level of kind of questioning is coming from whatever's just happened. Starting off with what was their knowledge and understanding with regards to what's just happened. What has caused us to maybe we've almost just taken the wind mirror out on that car. Now, I would suggest if we've got that close, then as an instructor, again, we should be preventing that anyway. If they got that close, again, the fault's already happening. That's on us. But we still need to discuss it. And if it's a lack of understanding, then they don't know what they don't know. So they can't be blamed for that mistake because they didn't realise or weren't given the right information to help them not be in that position. Do you know what I mean? So that's kind of checking their knowledge and understanding for a start is going to be the key. But then we need to go one step further, really, and everything's also about thoughts and feelings, isn't it? You know, and a lot of people, you'll get a lot of people with anxiety who are quite anxious about things these days, and it'll very much kind of come out in their driving. They might be nervous talking. There might be an emotion that they express as they're about to join onto the dual carriageway because now they're driving at 70 mile an hour that they don't like. And we're trying to kind of pick up on that body language and kind of asking them how they were feeling about that, you know, or what did they think about that situation? Were they quite blasé? Did they understand what's just happened? You know, so we're trying to get knowledge and understanding, then we're trying to get down to the kind of thoughts and feelings. And then once we kind of start to get to that, we can hopefully start to help them out a little bit. Oh, I really didn't like going up to 70 mile an hour and joining in with all those traffic coming down there then. Okay, so how can we make you feel a little bit better with that? And again, they might be like, I'm not too sure. Well, let's look at the skill set maybe that we need to be able to do that. So we need to kind of build the speed. We need to be getting up into fifth gear. Let's see if we can find a national speed limit road maybe where we can get up to 60 that's not joining onto the dual carriageway. So let's kind of pick them out of that situation, take them somewhere else where they can develop that skill, make them more comfortable with that before we stick them back on the slip road to try and join in. You know, they've obviously felt not great with that. And if we keep forcing them onto that dual carriageway, they're going to get so overwhelmed and start breaking down in tears in the car that they're never probably going to want to lesson with you again. And you'll likely lose them as well, let alone it probably becoming a little bit dangerous. So once we got to that knowledge and understanding and we've talked about their thoughts and feelings a little bit, we do need to let them know what the dangers and the consequences of that mistake are, because we've got to get them to realize that if they do it like that, then this is very likely going to happen. And when you're not sat in the car with them and later on down the line when you have passed and they've got to take that responsibility on board, again, how would you feel about if I wasn't here now and you would have hit that car that you just skimmed earlier? You know, whose insurance is that? And what if somebody was just getting out the car and we would have nicked that? And it's to try and kind of, it's not to try and do them down, but it's just to make them realize that they are in charge of the car now, and there's going to be some consequences to their actions if they don't quite do it right ultimately. And then we get on to the better part. So how are we going to correct it? You know, so again, it's the next question. So how are we going to make this better? How are we going to make it safer? And then we discuss how we're going to do it. And then we we do then need to physically do it as well. So the correction has to happen twice. We need to talk about how we're going to make it safer. We then need to go and do it. But before we go and do it, we now need to talk about how us as the instructor are going to help them out as well. You know, if they've just done something there as a safety critical thing, we need to have a good discussion about everything that I've just mentioned there. And then we need to try and agree a level of help, or whether it was a one-off mistake that they don't usually do, or now do they just want you to fully talk them through it, or are they quite comfortable with what they did? It was just they got a little bit closer. Maybe they just want you to prompt them on maybe how early that they need to start steering out. And then we can get quite specific to the fault then. So the fault might be that they've skimmed the vehicle, but in actual fact, they just needed maybe a bit of a prompt to steer out a little bit early because they're leaving it too late. All their mirrors and signal were fine. You know, if they've needed to indicate that is, they just needed help on steering out a bit sooner. And maybe that's all that it is. And then we know that when we come into that situation, we're going to help them out with that pre-agreed level of help. And then we go on to it, and hopefully that mistake's now gone, or they feel a bit better about it next time, which sounds a lot for one fault. But it's kind of like rinse and repeat then, isn't it? You know, another fault's about to come in, and how we start plugging away with the same kind of conversation. You know, it's the same things that we're trying to look for. We really need to get to the basis, and that can be hard for PDI sometimes. They can know something's wrong, but they don't quite get to the root cause of why it's wrong, and then they're off on the wrong kind of tangent. Then, you know what I mean? They know there's a fault there, but they're not quite curing it right. You know, so that can be a bit of a tricky one, because if they get that wrong, then they're struggling straight away. They're not going to really get to why it happened, and then the likelihood is it's going to happen again. And unless you do cure that fault, it's going to continue to happen. So yeah, that's kind of the basis of kind of what we try and get everybody to do with their questioning, really. And and it helps, and it just comes down to that knowledge and understanding and how they thought it was or how they feel about it. And a lot of anxiety and anxious sort of pupils these days, as I'm sure you know yourself, and feelings and reassurance that they're doing something and letting them know what they're coming into is absolutely everything, really. So yeah, that's kind of where I would start to push people and of what to start to think about asking as a terms to, and just, I know I've been rabbiting on about this one now. I would be very, very careful about using why have you done something. Sometimes PDIs do it a little bit. They don't mean to say it in the way that they do, but it can come across as a little bit of a personal kind of attack. So instead of going, okay, so what just happened there? And trying to figure out what's just gone on. They'd be like, oh, so why did you get close to that parked car then? Oh, and all of a sudden it's on the defensive then, isn't it? Because it feels like it's why did you do that? And I get what they're trying to question, but they're kind of using it in the wrong way. There's better ways, and I would always advise people be very careful with how you use why, because that'll start to put people on the back foot a little bit. Why did you do that? I didn't mean to, mate.
The questioning has made a huge difference to my lessons, and I've mentioned it previously, and it really stands out in kind of my head as to why we do it and the benefits of it. And it was a girl that was going too fast over a roundabout, and I was focused on we're going too fast. The fix is we go slower.
Mm.
And it took a few goes, and then we stopped, and it's like, let's have a chat. How are you feeling with these? What's going on? How can I help where we are? And a few questions later, we got to the point, and it was she didn't like being on the roundabout. She was scared of being on the roundabout.
Yeah.
And she knew she needed to slow down, but her thoughts were, I just want to get over as quick as I can.
Yeah.
So the fault for me as a driving instructor watching it and being able to make a quick fix was just brake more.
Yeah.
But that didn't help. It was, we needed to understand what her thoughts and feelings were. And then from there, we could work together to find a solution. And that was a big learning curve for me, because I was just assuming we're going too fast, use more brake, get into a lower gear, fixed, well done. And that was never going to help her
Yeah. Yeah.
because she knew it, she had the knowledge.
Yeah, and it's I got a very quick example myself of something quite similar. And a little while ago, I was trying to teach somebody a parallel park, and time after time after time again, this girl just couldn't get it, steering the wrong way after umpteen times, still not getting it. And do you know when you just like, I heard a good phrase once, and somebody said, "Oh, if you keep doing what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got." And I thought, I need to change something here. And we had a good chat, and what do you think's going on here? Why are we getting these sort of turns mixed up in the steering? What do you think's kind of going on? And anyway, we drilled deeper, and it ended up being a conversation about something along the lines of she needed to have some additional tests in college because she was very forgetful of certain things. But we kind of got onto a little bit of a reason to why she was forgetting this as well. And it was nothing really to do with driving. There was something else that kind of hadn't quite been diagnosed before that she was just kind of figuring out, but it came to fruition in a college as well. And it kind of like, it saved quite a lot of frustration as well, because you feel like you're trying your hardest sometimes and it's still not happening. And you're like, what the hell can I do here? Like, why, what can I change? And just by having a deeper conversation, we managed to get to a bit of a reason of why we thought that it was. And yeah, she kind of come back, and now knowing that, we can manage that better now. And it was only just by having a deeper conversation that I was like, I feel like I've got to the bottom of what's going on now. But if I wouldn't have had that conversation, I could have been still banging my head against a brick wall now, wondering why this isn't changing. What am I doing wrong here? Why isn't it? You got to try something different, haven't you? And just throw in some deeper questions. I think you'll get a lot better answers.
I got told that today. I took a student on for the first time today. She's come from another instructor. And I don't pry too much about previous lessons. They've gone elsewhere, fine, whatever. Um, and I was asking a few questions, and she was like, "These are these are weird questions, aren't they?" And I'm like, "But if we understand you and your decisions and you as a person, we can understand what's going to happen on the road and how you're going to react to different situations." And I think what she'd come from was being told, okay, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do, and just keep practicing what she'd been told.
Yeah.
And she was on kind of multi-lane roundabout, so quite complex situations. We ended up today focusing more on stopping the car, setting the car off with urgency and quicker, because she was driving everywhere with her foot on the clutch, so she didn't stall. And it was just through questions and questions that we got to. She was worried about stalling and then worried about holding up all the traffic around us and worried about getting onto a roundabout. And I'm like, well, what's the point in going on these busy roundabouts if you've got all of these thoughts going on? We're never going to make progress. So it was almost like we took a back step. And as an instructor wanting to offer value for money, I'm like, we're going back to probably the first 10 hours of a learner. Am I giving value for money? But at the end of the lesson, she was so much more confident
Yeah.
in her driving ability. And I think that's sometimes a challenge when we're having these questions and these conversations at the side of the road. We're almost like, we should be driving. They need to be driving. They need to be moving on to the next goal, the next topic. And it's like, well, that might get them to a certain point where they can just copy what you've told them to do. But it's not really creating an independent driver that can drive anywhere. And that's another interesting balance that we're trying to find, isn't it? It's like we need to give value for money. And sometimes that thought is that's achieved by driving more. And
Mm.
it's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, no, not at all. And by the sounds of it, you're absolutely bang on there, to be specific, what's the point in going on to roundabouts and stuff like that if she's still having all these issues? Let's get them nipped in the bud, very specific to what you want to do, and then we can start to bring them back in later, isn't it? So it sounds absolutely spot on. And just going back to like the question, I think going back to the realization that people don't have when they think, oh, I'll just become a driving instructor, that'll be easy. I'll do the 40 hours, that'll be fine. Everything that we've just talked about there, it's kind of like, wow, I didn't realize it was that in depth. And again, I remember myself, it certainly caught me off guard when I first started doing the job, and I feel like I've got better at it through the years. But it's, you feel like a counsellor, not a driving instructor these days, don't you? Because what's going on in their home life and what are their hobbies and anything that you can relate to. And, there's always going to be a good reason sometimes to why something's maybe not happening. And you just don't know unless you ask the question. So it's no good that first little surface question. Oh, why do you want to do roundabouts today? I'm a bit hesitant. Okay, let's go to roundabouts and have a look at that hesitancy then. What are we going to achieve just with that? It's not enough. Yeah, it's a question, but there's got to be some deeper question in there.
Absolutely. And I think that's where this job can become overwhelming if we're not digging deeper to those questions. Like you've just said there, I'm a bit hesitant on roundabouts. Okay, let's go and find some roundabouts where there's some cars and you've got to find your gap. And the amount of fires you end up fighting in those situations if we've not figured out why that hesitation is happening. And
Yeah.
there's going to be a whole list of different reasons that could be happening. And if we don't know the reason, we're going to be going to a roundabout and they're going to be panicking, they're going to be slamming the brakes on, they're going to be rushing onto a roundabout and there's not a gap. And we're just like, how can I manage this situation? This is becoming not safe. And it's like those deeper questions, I think, prevent a lot of those situations from happening because you're specific with what you need to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. And always the last one before you're going to go into that situation then is, once you've had all those conversations and those deeper questions, how would they like you to help them out with regards to that hesitation? Is it hesitation because they're coming in too fast? So it's actually, the speed on approach coming in slower is going to give them more time to make a better decision when they get to the roundabouts, thus improving the hesitation, perhaps, if speed on the approach is the issue. So the speed on the approach might be the key to it all. So do you want me to tell you how slow you want to be coming in at, or do you want me to tell you when to start braking, or, how would you like it? You got to find it out of them, and whatever they kind of say, we can give it a go, with a proviso of, regardless of the pre-agreed level, if something's starting to go the other way, we've got to step in and come in to prevent something from happening again. So you could have all that conversation and still needing to fully talk them through something if something's about to happen that you can prevent.
And this is just questions.
Yep. Yeah.
We can see why, like you've mentioned, that the 40 hours is so difficult to fit everything in that needs to be fit in, because we've not even discussed about how specific you need to be on the first few lessons, like using a handbrake, using the gears, using the clutch, using the brake, and how much brake, how much accelerator, how are we going to find the bite point? And if you don't want to do most of that, go automatic. It's going to be a little bit easier, but it doesn't change the overall fact that becoming a driving instructor takes a lot of time and self-study. And I think you've got to be disciplined with it as well. It's not a case of someone like yourself who's going to give a PDI all of the information that they need in 40 hours to go and pass a part 3 and become a qualified driving instructor.
Yeah, and again, we get as much as we can in within that 40 hours. And it's kind of like I said at the start, I really wanted more time. I really, really wanted more time, because now they're going to be unleashed on a trainee license. And although they will learn, I personally would have always liked them to be at a higher standard than they currently are, to be able to get unleashed on the roads. And it's just, I don't know if it'll ever change. I think it probably should. And I think they should have a higher time, but then will people pay the money for 120 hours? I dare say they probably wouldn't.
I think this is another road that we could end up going down, and maybe we won't tonight, but how many jobs are out there that are such high risk and the stakes are so high with it? Can you get through the process and the minimum required is 40 hours? And I mean, if we're being honest, you could go from parts 1 to parts 3 and become an ADI without ever talking to a trainer, because there's no legal minimum. It's just the PDI license that the hours are for, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is crazy that what we do. And I think I'd like to get this message out as well, is how important this job is and how much of a risk it is for 17 to 24-year-olds driving on their own in a car with their mates. And we're the ones that are potentially putting them on the road. Yes, they've got an exam, so they've got a 35-minute snapshot of their driving.
Yeah.
But we're with them for X amount of hours to develop them as drivers as much as we can. So it's not just learn to be a driving instructor. It's let's look at what we're putting on the road and who we're sharing the road with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at that sort of GDE matrix and levels 1 and 2, car control. They could pass the test really on car control and sort of like road knowledge and stuff like that. But we're trying to educate them higher, really, aren't we? And, trying to make them aware of the risks of drinking alcohol and the night before if you're going on driving it, and just trying to make them think about their own responsibilities behind the wheel, because again, it will have real life consequences at the end of the day, and that's the higher level that we want to try and educate them on, really, isn't it? Not just how to drive a car and this is what you should do. It's kind of making them think and realize and take that responsibility for their actions before they get behind the wheel of, okay, if you are really tired because you've just worked a night shift, is it the best possible choice to get behind the wheel and go for a 3-hour drive somewhere, or all real aspects to their life that will affect behind the wheel.
I think that comes back to those questions again, doesn't it? We can very quickly tell someone, you need to be going slower into this gear. This is what you need to do for this roundabout to get through your driving test. Great. They're going to get through the driving test. Do they
Yeah,
understand why? Do they know what's happening? Do they understand how they react in different scenarios and whether that's a good reaction or whether they can control the situation? And I think that understanding, and maybe not questions and having a specific question, but being able to have a conversation to understand the individual and help them understand themselves is, I think that's where it starts for our job, to put those safe drivers on the road.
yeah, absolutely.
So speaking of questions, I have some questions for you. Do you mind if we go through them?
Yeah, let's do it.
So I've got some tell me questions. I will get started with the first one and we'll see how we get on with them. But the first question, can you tell me what car you would drive if it was the only car you could drive forever?
Ooh, I haven't got one, but I guess I'd probably just pick a VW transporter or like a camper or something like that. You know, something that chuck the family in, chuck the dog in the back, get away. Haven't got one, would love to have one. I'd probably pick that.
Nice. That's on my list one day. A camper of some description. I need
Yeah,
to be delivering more driving lessons.
yeah, they're quite expensive, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, they are. So the next question, can you tell me if you could deliver a driving lesson to anyone, who would it be?
To anyone, that's an interesting question. Um, like I used to quite like the Foo Fighters, and I was a little bit gutted when Taylor Hawkins, the drummer, had died. Not to take a downwards turn. I played drums myself, and he was quite a big inspiration when I was kind of starting to play music. So it would be him. I would suggest Taylor Hawkins.
Nice. Can you tell me the best advice you ever received?
Best advice. I guess it would have been something along the lines of, I can't remember the exact way that I got told it before, but it was something along the lines of, if you make a mistake once, it's a learning point. If you make it again, then then we've got a problem. I always try and learn from my own mistakes, and sometimes it's the only way that I do learn personally. So if I do make a bit of an error, I always try and kind of learn from it, and that's it. It's just a learning point. If you make a mistake, it's just a learning point. There we go. You could probably
Nice.
cut it out.
Can you tell me your favorite book?
Favorite book? To be honest, I don't do a lot of reading. If I'm being honest, I probably should read more than I do. I guess some of the ones that I've found quite interesting. I think you probably mentioned them before. Things like Rich Dad Poor Dad. Quite like them. I find them quite interesting. I quite like some sort of autobiographies, if you like. But yeah, that was probably up there with one of the most recent ones that I'd read anyway, and I quite enjoyed it.
Rich Dad Poor Dad. I love that book. I
Yeah,
don't know where it is. I lent it to a friend. I don't know. I can't remember which one. I was like, read this. It's an eye opener.
yeah. I'd not read it before, but I found it really interesting, and it certainly makes you think.
Yeah, it does. So we'll move on then. Can you tell me one message you would give to someone who is considering becoming a driving instructor?
um, to just put the time in your own time. The time, the 40 hours, like we heavily talked about, will go really quickly. The better you know your topics, you don't need to be in the car with your trainer to actually practice, and just spend as much time as you can just revising the topics, and really make the use of the amount of time then that you've got with a trainer, working on instructional abilities, full talk throughs, Q&As, fault finding, rather than the need to waste time filling you in on lack of information that you've got with regards to the topic that you're about to go into on that day.
Nice. Can you tell me one piece of advice you would give a student before they go for the driving test?
For the driving test, um, I used to say to mine, just do what you're doing now. So they would have been with you for X amount of hours. Don't change what you're doing. Don't drive any differently. Very commonly, you will see them kind of now just driving extra slowly everywhere because now they're getting watched and now they're starting to pick up driving faults for not driving at appropriate speed. So just keep doing what you're doing. Don't change it. And then if you do make a mistake, it's a lot easier to fix.
Nice. Can you tell me something you wish you were better at?
Better at? Probably, and I know it's probably a little bit sad, I could probably still work on the questioning element. I still want to really improve that. I think it's such a big part of the job that we do, and I think I do an okay job of it. But there's always room for improvement, and I'm probably not digging deep enough sometimes. But I think I do a pretty okay job. But I think I could always do with improving the questioning. I would never say no to additional training with regards to that.
Nice. The final one is, do you have any final messages? And then feel free to plug anything that you guys have got coming up and where people can find you as well.
Um, well, I work under Nigel Richards Driving School. He's been on quite recently. I've just been helping him out do the training. Oh, I think we've covered everything that we've needed to cover. I wouldn't say any final messages as such, other than just put the practice in your own time. I really just can't emphasize enough just how much time and practice this job takes. Don't just take the 40 hours as I'll do that and I'll be amazing. It really will scratch the surface, and don't come into it thinking that will be enough, because it really isn't. It really, really isn't. So if you're coming in it with the right mind frame to work on it and take the time and practice in your own time to get better, then give it a shot.
Do you guys offer support for PDIs that are maybe struggling as well? I know a lot of people that watch this are struggling to find their way through the process. Is that something that you guys can help with?
We'd certainly be open to it, I'm sure. We haven't currently, as far as I'm aware. We only, or have only at the moment, been training the PDIs that are with us at the moment. I guess obviously if it's from further afield and we're based in Wrexham, it would only be over the likes of Zoom or something like that we could really help with that. I think people would have to be quite specific to what kind of help they would like. That would always help us. I can't see why there would ever be any problem with that. Myself, Nigel would be more than happy to help, I'm sure. So yeah, absolutely. If anybody wants to reach out, then let us know.
Amazing. Nick, thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been quite enjoyable.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you.
Cheers, mate.